Steve Davis, this is Richard Hood. I thought I was going to get to Toronto and Brazil, but no. And I'm from Chicago, so I brought the weather for you this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah, really? I hate it. That's why I moved. I don't like it. So we're going to talk a little bit today. Richard's one of our certified forensic investigators and a PI. I'm also a PI. He's going to talk a little bit, and you can sit and relax, buddy. You can understand. He's going to talk a little bit about the workshop part's good because you guys don't have to do a whole bunch. And it's a little weird because when you do forensic collections of mobile devices, they can be anywhere from like 15, 20 minutes, or they could be 12 hours long. So obviously we can't do a real phone, but we did it in the background and then we did some screenshots for you. And we'll talk about kind of the differences between it. And we'll have a touch of fun. So in order to remain relevant when you hit the age of 50, you can do like one of three things. So if you can get three 20-something-year-old daughters, which I have, that's a good one, because they will get you up to date on like food, fashion, travel, pretty much everything I can't do, they tell you about, so that's cool. Number two, I was at a presentation not long ago. Mark Cuban was speaking, and he said that if there's one book you got to read, and I went and bought it, it was basically Machine Learning for Dummies. So I went and bought it. I'm reading it now. It's really interesting. I come back from the days of like COBOL and Fortran and BASIC, and now all of the machine learning and AI is predicated on like R and Python and things like that. So I'm not going to start coding necessarily, but I want to be familiar with kind of the backdrop of what's driving machine learning across a lot of different platforms. Obviously, e-discovery is going to be a gigantic one in terms of application. And then the third thing, if you don't have either of those to be relevant, is really either to read or watch TV, right? So this will have a little fun. You're going to see some analogies and some references to some books, some classical stuff, some streaming shows that are on TV, a couple movies, and we do another presentation on the brave new world of data that we were chatting about a few minutes ago that does a lot of stuff that's really Hulu, Netflix, Amazon. It makes an analogy to what we're doing. So where is the evidence? Mobile device collections. Where's Waldo, right? Look, my kids were all little, I all love this stuff. And so Richard helped craft, because he's way better at the whole graphic presentation thing, the presentation, we first did it. And so I said, well, we need to have two screens, because there's one screen talking about where's Waldo, and then the second one, you'll see the little, there it is, over there on the right, you see the little circle, the red circle. And after he showed me that, I still couldn't find it inside that circle, but he is there. That's my background. Effectively old, been around a long time, licensed private investigator, private security company manager, testified a myriad of times on a whole bunch of different topics. Try not to testify anymore, don't like doing it that much. But when we first got involved, our company's 20 plus years old, when we first got involved with doing kind of transitioning from the days, I cut my teeth in the Resolution Trust Corporation. It was basically the quasi-governmental agency that was the solution to the SNL crisis. Obviously huge in Dallas. I actually had apartments in Phoenix, in Atlanta, traveled around doing investigations. Back in those days, a lot of it was paper-based. But then we transitioned to ESI, electronically stored information. And there's a guy named Mike Alexio, who's been to a number of shows that I've been to, that basically came up with a very, very simple template, and I'm not going to read to you, but basically a simple template that talked about how to approach investigations for private investigators, forensic investigators. First thing, what question are you answering? I always laugh when I think about, lawyers call me or practitioners call me and they say, hey, I've got 10 gigs of data. And I'm like, do you? I mean, how do you know you have 10 gigs of data? I mean, what is the case about? What's the problem that you're trying to uncover? What are you trying to answer? And they're like, well, I want to know this, I want to know that. And I said, well, it could be a whole bunch of other things that are actually in play beyond 10 gigs of data. So the first thing you say is, what question are you answering? And then what data do you need to answer that question? And then how do you get to that data? How do you extract it? And then what does the data tell you? Pretty simplistic, pretty basic, but actually a good template. Anybody remember this movie, Usual Suspects? Great movie. Kaiser Sose. Greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. Right?
Why you pointing at me?
You love movies. The greatest trick tech ever pulled was making you believe that a phone is the same as a computer. Okay? This is probably the number one, excuse me, you're fine right where you are. Grab my phone. People look at this, and because of graphical user interface, really mobile user interface when you talk about phones, you look at it and you think it's the same as a computer, that there's a file structure there, you can get to it, you can print it out. But the reality is phones are based on or predicated on databases. They're structured data, much like Oracle or SAP or SQL or things like that. In fact, the iOS devices are based off the SQLite database. And so data as it resides on your phone and data as it resides in the cloud or on a server or on a computer are different. And they're different in terms of extracting, and they're different in terms of parsing. When we do forensic images of computers, you can go do a bit-by-bit image of a computer, get the totality of the space, you get all the live files, you may get some deleted files pre-solid state technology. You get a lot of forensic artifacts that exist also, but then you get unallocated, obviously, in Slack. But that's not true when you talk about phones. And I think that basic misunderstanding, maybe not on any of your parts, but on a lot of people's parts, leads to confusion down the line when they want to review data, parse data, extract data, access data, produce it to the other side. Those are 5 of the popular databases that are utilized. We're going to have just a little bit of fun. We're going to ask you a couple questions later, quiz questions on a couple things. But each one of the phones are going to be utilizing basically light database technology to house data, which means that it's going to be structured in tables, and that when you use products, there's a whole series of products that are out there that do collections of information off the phones, and historically, what you've dealt with has been called an advanced logical extraction of data. So when people use the word, hey, do a phone image, it's really not an image necessarily, because you're not using that technology, but you're really just using a forensic extraction tool that's going to take data as it can. Recently, and we're going to talk about this, Cellebrite, which is the 800-pound gorilla in the marketplace of mobile device collections, came out with something which is a physical collection tool. We've been testing it. Richard's going to go over some of the delta and differential between the data you can get from the physical versus the logical. But the way it's been for the last 15, 20 years has been predominantly logical, so that you could not, as it related to iOS, you could, which is because, so everyone knows Android and Apple. Those are the 2 categories of data that we talk about when we get to mobile technology, whether it be tablets, apps and services, or actual phones. So the iOS technology, historically, you could not get to mail. That's the thing. When lawyers call and they say, hey, need to get this guy's mail, I have his phone. I'm like, well, chances are we probably can't unless there's a third-party app on there that maybe you can get some. Probably not resident there. If it is, it's probably securitized such that you can't access it. So we usually look at other places where data may exist. So mobile OS is growing exponentially. 20 years ago when we did investigations, I would say 1% maybe of cases involved trying to get to mobile devices. I would say that right now I'm working on probably 5 active investigations, literally as of last night, and every one of those utilizes investigation into mobile technology. In fact, the old days when everyone said, hey, go get the Exchange database. When you're talking about criminals or you're talking about crooks, most of them aren't like logging into their corporate accounts and sending stuff over and saying, let's defraud the company or let's start a new company. Most are semi-sophisticated enough not to do that. So what they're usually utilizing is messaging. And messaging applications, you obviously can use computers for messaging applications, but you also use mobile devices and tablets for that. And for some reason, people feel like when they text or browse on a phone that somehow it's more secure. People can't get to it, or no one's going to look at it, which don't know why they think that. But they do, and so they're a little freer and easier in the way they communicate, the things they say. We have a whole vernacular of how kids talk and younger people talk on information like this, it's a cryptic a little bit, and the utilization of apps, right? So it's a whole new frontier in terms of where we need to be looking in civil and criminal investigations for data. So this is a little iconic. Two different kind of takeaways to the whole Excalibur, which was King Arthur's sword. What's the famous thing about swords? Double-edged, right? Two sides. So you have two things when you talk about data. You have residency of data, and you have redundancy of data. So pretty simple words, but residency of data, where does it exist? Redundancy of data, where else may it exist? So residency nowadays, we're seeing a lot more places where data exists, which means if you're doing like an exfiltration or a remediation case, and you're going in, you're having to wipe data that exists from certain places, you may have a lot more places to clean up. So when you spill the cup of water, it's now in 17 places, not just one. So you got to clean up a lot of different places where data may exist. Or if you're saying, listen, I'm going to another company, I want to make sure I don't have any corporate information, it may not just be wiping it from your phone or resetting to factory settings or deleting it from your computer, maybe on cloud, it may be synced somewhere else. So where in the iOS, so Mac OS is for your Mac computers, iOS is for your Apple mobile devices, where are locations where mobile device data may exist? Right there. So time machines are iterative, but they contain backup information. So I've had a lot of cases where people do the old drop the phone in the water, or, you know, oh my gosh, I reset it to factory settings, straight up my bad, you know. And the reality is you can still get to data potentially if you can get to these items. It's very interesting, like iCloud, do anybody access iCloud, know anything about it, all that, right? So Apple's a really interesting company. Do a lot of work with them, very good company, you know, but they're fickle. And they sometimes block you, like from accessing an API to access information in the cloud. Sometimes they don't. And as things move generation from generation, we find access to older versions of phones and firmware and software. Right now, we can get to iPhone backups in the cloud, right?
Yes, we can, right now,
Yeah,
today.
6 months ago we didn't.
No.
Yeah, and so I had a major case in China, and the only thing we had was access to the cloud, and the API got disabled. And so we couldn't access any of the information that existed, and there were phone backups. You could see the phone backups that it talks about it. Like, if people are worried about, hey, I'm being hacked or socially engineered or whatever, I can go to my account, my kids are on it, my wife's on it, and I can see exactly what devices have been hooked up to it, what has been shared, what has been accessed, what has been copied, and there's certain limited logging that's still available there, but you can see what's connected, and you can also see if people are infiltrating and trying to get in. Obviously, phone backups on computers. I like working out, so I like to listen to music, and so I hook my phone up to my computer, and I've now created a series of backups that exist. And it's much like LIFO, FIFO accounting, where it pushes out over time, but you'll still get a series of backups. You can go in and find what still exists there. So those are some of the products that exist in the phone collection, and we're pretty agnostic when it comes to, you know, saying you have to use this, you have to use that. I mean, I know Kevin and I have talked about previously, like, there's a whole balance scale thing between, you know, how much do you want to spend? If you only need to get text messages, do you really need the 800-pound gorilla? Or are there other products that are more shareware or freeware that you can get to data if it's not a terrorist activity, if it's not a major case where you need to have the totality of all the data extracted? And yes, there are. There's a series of them. These are about 5 or 6 of the popular ones that we own and use in our lab. And I'm going to tell you in a little while, and Richard will, why we have multiple products. Why not just settle on one and make a choice? I can tell you right now, Cellebrite, once again, the biggest player in the market, we've had cases where we've taken data and extracted it out of Cellebrite, utilizing Cellebrite's parser, because that's really what you're doing, is you're parsing data, much like you're parsing a JSON file with Java. Same thing for like Oxygen or Encase or any of those, and have gotten different results. That's, you know, semi-alarming, not really, because, I mean, you're working with basically coding technology to extract out data from structured data, structured databases, and so they all don't work the same, the codes aren't the same and how they work, and so you get differing levels. Like we said, Cellebrite just issued a new update we'll talk about that is getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25% more data. And that's true of both data classification types and raw data. So not just 20 to 25% more text messages, but actually data types and classifications of data that we couldn't previously get. And we're not experts in the new version because we are literally testing it on our own phones right now. We've used it, and we'll talk about some of the pros and cons about that. So I'm going to let Richard address this because I don't know what it means, but I do know what the cute little Android and the Apple are, but those things that sit above it are actually product-specific kind of parsing.
Sure, yeah. So everyone remembers the old commercial, are you a Mac or are you a PC? It's the age-old debate. So I'm not here to solve that, but I'm going to talk about at a high level the differences when you're collecting an iOS device or an Android device. And so those two icons up there, PA stands for Physical Analyzer. That is going to be the extrapolator for iOS devices. Now, for PC over Android is going to be what we use to extract the data from the Android device. Then we take that extraction and put it into the Physical Analyzer to then parse out that data. So I'll let Steve talk about market share and devices as the debate continues.
So when you talk about Android, we think about mobile devices, but Android also covers what else?
There's a plethora of things. Nest, cameras, drones even, anything really with a hard drive that's not an iOS device.
So the Android class, you can actually capture data resident. When you're doing investigation, forensic investigations, or I do a lot of ransomware cases and malware cases. And a lot of the malware gets embedded in places that are not file structure oriented. So like rootkit, viruses. You put things on modems nowadays. You can put things on drones, and you think about the Nest. You saw the kids thing where it's in the baby's room and the guy's talking to the kid in the crib. You now have infiltration of different products either by breaching like home network systems or breaching individual devices because they don't have the same securitization or security devices associated with them as standard mobile devices do. So I'm going to ask two quiz questions because right now it's been a soliloquy. So first one is, I'm going to tell you of all the manufacturers of mobile devices, hardware, in the world, Apple is number 3. Name the top 2.
Samsung?
It's one of them, and I did not, because I know him, I did not give him the information. What's the other one, Smarty? Who? Huawei, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Excellent. So you guys killed that. And there you go. You'll see the ones also behind it. That's global. So who's the leader in the U.S.? I could barely hear you. It's like my kids when they talk to me. What now? Who's the leader in the U.S.? Apple. Okay, so then if Apple's the leader, name the next 3 in the U.S.
Samsung.
Very good. Samsung. Stealing Eric's answer. Good. What are the other 2? I didn't get any of these, by the way. LG. Excellent. LG's one of them. And what's the third? The third one's a little bit of a curveball.
HTC.
No, think mobile device, not phone.
Windows.
Lenovo. Because tablet. There's a little bit of a curveball. It's almost unfair. So the interesting thing there is, you think about going other places, and we run into this. I'm doing a collection, not me, right this second from Ireland. We're doing one right now. And so you get into the whole privacy thing, and personal information, protection of the data. And the thing is, all the platforms are different. And so literally the guy I'm working with for the channel is in Ireland, had to buy an Irish phone. I know it sounds funny. It's like Irish coffee, Irish whiskey, Irish phone. He had to buy an Irish phone when he's there to do his work and communicate with me when he's over there. All right, we all know this, right? So, like 10 days, whatever it was ago, one of my daughters was in town. All 3 of them live in Austin. And she was up for a couple days, and so she was like, yeah, I'm going back, Dad, on Sunday morning. I said, well, don't go central because I heard they're imploding this building. So go tollway. I don't want to spend the money. I said, just go to the tollway. It's fine. So she didn't, she didn't listen to me. So she went at like 10 o'clock downtown. It wasn't too bad traffic-wise, but this was the State of the Union. This is the famous Leaning Tower of Dallas now. So Richard was doing a collection the other day downtown within the last week, and I said, stop and get a picture, if you would please, of the demo thing. And so he got out there and he was telling me what, like there was 100 people.
Yeah, it was. This was during the middle of the day, during a work week, and there were maybe 100 to 200 people just gawking, taking pictures, setting up picnics. It was pretty astounding.
So obviously demo and demolition, but also in demonstration. So Richard's going to talk a touch about kind of the Android and the iOS collections that we do, the product we use, and let's take some screenshots. There you go, dude.
Sure. Yeah, so I hope this demonstration goes better than that demo. So as Steve mentioned, I work in the lab. I'm a forensic analyst, and I do a lot of in-field or on-site collections. And one of the things that I always bring with me is this Cellebrite kit. Being in the litigation support world, we always know what phone and what device we're getting, right?
Or never, right?
Or never.
Yeah.
So in this kit, I've got every type of connector, adapter possible. So we're ready for anything. There's 3 things that I need for every collection in order to properly collect the phone. The first is I need this licensing dongle. This is our key to the software that I'm about to explain to you. Secondly, I'm going to need the custodian's permission. We're going to get a signed chain of custody in which they will then release the device to us. And third, if you haven't already figured it out, we need the physical device. So today I'm going to go through a demonstration of both an iPhone collection and an Android. And we've done a Food Network pre-baked-esque kind of demonstration here. So right now we're going to start with the iPhone. So this is an iOS device. This is my personal device. This is a 6S. So what we do, after we change a few settings, get the user PIN, I then go and turn it on airplane mode and plug the phone in. Once I plug the phone in, we're going to get this extraction selection screen. As Steve mentioned, the physical mode over here in the middle, that's a relatively new option. We haven't always been able to collect physically from the iPhone. The advanced logical is primarily what we use in the field and what I have been using for the past few collections that I've been on. We check everything, we plug it in, we double check the password, we trust both the device and the computer. And to give you an idea of this collection, it was roughly 11 gigs.
So you're not a teenage girl.
So I'm not a teenage
Okay,
girl,
okay.
so I don't have that much stuff on my phone. The next screen that's going to populate is the extraction method. Once we've already identified that we're going to make a logical extraction, there's 2 different methods. Now you'll see method 1 is highlighted as the recommended method. That is what I use about 95% of the time. Method 2 is going to be a redundancy or fail-safe should anything go wrong in the field. So we'll select method 1 and use that for these purposes. This screen is the screen I always love to see. And unfortunately, it almost never populates. And I'll tell you why. As Steve mentioned earlier, he plugs his phone in to his laptop or his desktop to download his music. That inadvertently makes a backup. When you make a backup, Apple is going to prompt you, hey, do you want to encrypt your backup? Yeah, sure, let's encrypt it. But you've got a caveat. Well, 2 really. The password has to be independent of both your iCloud and your PIN. So now you've got to manage a 3rd password. Most people, and I say about 9 times out of 10, most people set that password and forget it. Okay, so now we can't have access to the phone. But we have a solution. So the solution is we reset personal settings. So this isn't going to affect any data. It's not going to affect any passwords. Things it's going to affect are the home screen layout, your display brightness, and your wallpaper. Those,
Wi-Fi?
well, you can reset the Wi-Fi settings separate, but yeah, that's another thing. The main point is no data or passwords are affected. All the metadata stays the same. A lot of people get unshaky about that. Whoa, we can't mess with anything. From Apple's website, these are the steps that you take. The most important takeaway is that the backup password is then removed.
So the implication of that is if you've got computers or other devices that were synced where you had those resident backups we talked about earlier, you no longer can access those backups now that you've used this new methodology and done the bypass. He's created a brand new backup, which is good, and it has all the data. However, behavior-wise, people are deleting stuff all the time. Like, we're gonna get to some screens later that Richard's gonna show. It's gonna show stuff in the, I don't know if it's blue, it's blue and red, I think it is, but the red is deleted data. And I work on investigations where, like 99% of the data is deleted. Like, really? Like, no one does that, actively go through and just deletes everything unless you're trying to avoid things. Or other people just like sometimes delete certain parts of conversations or delete some conversations to clean up their phone. And you'll see artifacts of all different data sets, and it'll show you which ones came from the live environment and which ones came from the dead environment or the deleted environment. So what happens is all that chance to get to the iterations that may have existed in the various locations we talked about, including the cloud, iCloud, and backups that live on the computer, don't exist anymore once you use this technique. But this is the only technique you got if you're out in the field and they need to have a contemporaneous collection done of the data that exists on the physical device at that point in time. That's what you're up against. And I was speaking with like an expert on phone technology not long ago at another function. He was like, "Really? I didn't know that." I was like, "Really?" I was surprised that he didn't know that because he was like a renowned expert in this area. But it's something that we just learned as we did, that we found out once you reset and have to go that route, you no longer can get to the historical backups.
So I have a question.
Sure.
So we've had instances where we don't have access to a phone, but we may have access to someone's sync with their iTunes.
Mhm.
Basically gives you the same thing. Does the same type of technology exist for the non-iPhones?
For Android?
Huh?
For Android?
Yeah.
So it does, but it's not the same level of encryption. There's not a workaround where you can just reset the phone and it takes that
Sure,
encryption
and I'm
away.
taking
Right.
the encryption piece out of it.
Okay.
Say they didn't choose the encryption. It's someone favorable to you and they just want you to have a backup of their iPhone to access what you need. But we've had issues where, it's easy to deal with if you're dealing with an iPhone, but if they have an Android, kind of shrug our shoulders, not sure, unless you do a physical application or a physical acquisition of the phone, and sometimes they're in Hawaii or
Sure.
Hong Kong or wherever. It's easier if you can just have them do a backup and then ship it to you.
Yeah, if you're not using like a Google, if you don't have like a Google backup in the cloud for that data, so a lot of the Androids don't have backups effectively, then what we've had to do on occasion is actually we will get a naked device that we get in our lab. We have a whole series of phones in our lab that we basically work to download directly from the cloud to that device and resurrect the data that exists in the cloud and put it onto a device and then utilize extraction methods to populate the reports. That's kind of the way you have to go with that, if you can't get to the physical.
That's the workaround that
That
we've
is,
come up
yeah.
with. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I have always had an iPhone, so I know how that works, but
Yeah.
I've never had an Android, so I don't necessarily know how that works.
Yeah, that's a great question.
One quick question.
Yeah.
So I think, I just want to make sure the assumption here is that you've got full compliance in cooperation.
Yes.
from-
That is-
From the owner of the phone.
That is correct.
Make sure that's, so if you don't have a password and you don't have the access to the phone through the owner of the phone or the user of the phone, then you pretty much are dealing with Frank, right?
Yeah, so, and there's some exceptions now with the new physical we'll talk about a little bit, but if you think about San Bernardino and the fact the government wanted Apple to like fess up and give them the back door, there is no back door. At that point in time of technology, there was not a back door. What happened in that case was Cellebrite actually figured out how to disable the counter. So instead of having it count up to whatever it is nowadays,
10.
410, whatever, but I mean, it's been different things at different times. But what they did is disable the counter so it was able to do all the iterations. Like if you have a garage door opener, at your house, like we have one on the exterior, I always disable it because you can buy a product that goes through and there's only 9 or 10 digits on it. And in a matter of like a minute or two, it can go through every iteration of it and open your garage door. If it's a simple 4 or 6 code thing, particularly if it's numeric only. But yeah, absent, so up to like a month ago, you're exactly right. Besides maybe like chip-off technology, where you can go into like a clean room and actually try to extract data that way. We don't do that. I know companies that do that. That would be one way around. And then we're going to talk about also a little bit of the jailbreaking technology that exists with the new physical extraction that also allows us to get some data absent on a locked phone, right?
Very, very
Limited?
little
Yeah.
data, very limited, and it's primarily more for law enforcement use. But yeah, we'll just address that here in a minute. So assuming we've sorted out all of the password and encryption issues, the phone's going to collect. So once the phone is done with the extraction process, this screen's going to populate. It's going to give you an estimate of the total size and time elapsed. From this point, we're going to open it in the physical analyzer. That physical analyzer is then going to extrapolate the data and present it to a nice graphic user interface that's extremely intuitive. So this is the Cellebrite phone report that I'm sure most of you are very familiar with. Now on the left panel, it's going to be your summary report, going to have all the categories. As Steve mentioned earlier, all the numbers in white are live data numbers. And then the red, next to a few of those categories, that's going to be the reclaimed or recovered data that has been marked for deletion, but hasn't been pushed out off of the physical device. So one interesting thing here too is that if you've got this phone report generated, you can search for anything globally on the phone, whether it be a phone number, whether it be an image, or even a date range. And then that's what we, back in the lab, do to promote up to the next level. Switching gears for a little bit, I'm going to talk about the Android collection. Now, for the most part, the initial steps are pretty much the same. They're very similar. But there's a few nuances I'd like to go over. So when we plug the phone in, we edit some settings, some developer settings. Each Android is different. It's not systemized like the iPhone environment. So after we adjust a few settings, we're going to come to this screen after we launch the UFED for PC application, which is under the Cellebrite umbrella. You can see, as we talked about earlier, mass storage devices, cameras, SIM cards, drones, really anything with a hard drive that's not an Apple device. So most of the time, our software is able to auto-detect the phone. If for any reason it doesn't auto-detect, you can manually browse the devices by entering the model number in. On this one, it populates our device, which is a Samsung Galaxy S5. And right here, this is the extraction type selection screen. So
Yeah, and this is kind of critical because when you deal with, and there's some slides here in a few minutes, I know that I'll be a little redundant, but when you go and do a collection with an iPhone, an iOS platform, you really have two choices. You have the logical historically, now you have the logical and physical, right? With Androids, it's different. Right, Richard?
it is different. So yeah, you're going to see the advanced logical and the physical, which were those same options we had for the iOS extraction. You're also going to have a file system, and then even break it down further by category. You can only collect the camera or multimedia or just screenshots. So screenshots of emails, screenshots of documents maybe that were taken that might be imperative to a particular case. So for an apples to apples comparison, we are going to do the advanced logical as well. Once you select the extraction method, it's going to auto-populate some identifiers for the device and then give you a blurb about the data resident, which is 9 gigs. So pretty similar to the 11 gigs we had on the iPhone. This is the real main difference here that I want to highlight. As it relates to iOS devices, whether it's an iPhone or an iPad, in order to extract the data, we must extract it in its complete form. There is no cherry picking, there is no drilling down on specific content. We must collect the entire device as it is.
At the collection site. Obviously, that then begs the issue of what you do back in the lab, because every single person I've ever spoken to in 25 years is like, I have personal data on my stuff. And I'm like, I totally get it. And I am also concerned about my personal information, whether it's banking related or personal pictures or whatever the things, behaviors, whatever. If I'm on ESPN all the time, I don't want people looking at my stuff and seeing all the personal stuff. Unfortunately, the reality with iOS is it's kind of a all or nothing, we say. And you have to get all. But the good news is it's all bits and bytes. It's all encrypted. It's nothing we really look at in its own form, and then you can designate back in the lab, we only want text communications between Richard and I, or we only want this category of information, or I want voicemail messages, or whatever it is you want, and only that can come out of the black box and get promoted into an environment where humans are actually putting eyes on it. And that's really the only way for iOS. The good news with Android is you have a little more specificity in terms of being able to get to categories of data and only collect certain things.
That's right. Specifically in the field, we always recommend, if there's time permitting, to go ahead and collect the full device, and then we can make some of those edits back in our lab. But the reality of it is some of these Android devices are much, much larger in size in terms of data and what exists on the device, and a full collection can take several hours.
Yes?
Excuse me, I get a fair amount of requests for data to be extracted from them. Number one, the biggest issue is the person to whom the phone belongs never wants to give up the phone.
Sure.
Is there a time frame that we're working with? If I say, yeah, you have to give me your phone, because I have to give it to the vendor, the people who are going to do the extraction. Is there a time frame? Is it a 1 day turnaround, or is it a 5 day or 7 day turnaround? Is there a rough estimation?
Sure. I was going to ask you guys a minute ago a question about how long does it take, in your opinion? I mean, assuming that we don't have 10,000 cases going on and, it's a queuing issue, but, if we have the ability to get to a phone and it's resident in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and it's either an iPhone or an Android device, there's no reason why any qualified vendor that has bandwidth can't get that back to you in a day. I mean, and frankly, people want their phone. I mean, business people need to use it. So how long, and I know there's a lot of considerations, I understand the variables, but just for fun, how long does it take to capture an iPhone roughly?
2 hours.
Okay.
What I've heard.
I've seen you guys do it in 30 minutes or less.
I think those are both great answers. I think it's right in that area between maybe 30 minutes to an hour and a half on average. Once again, keep my daughters out of it, because when they're there, they all have the biggest phones and it's chocked full. I mean, I look at we have unlimited, obviously, everything. And it's you look at it and it's how do you work? How can you text that much? It's just unbelievable how much stuff they access. But absent that, if it's an actual adult, then it usually is that area of, just kidding, just, half hour to hour and a half total. Androids, how long do they take roughly? And I know it's all over the world, guys, but.
Varies a lot, what you need.
So let's assume a full.
I've had incidents where they just come in for an hour, get 50 minutes.
Sure. With targeted, absolutely. If you're doing the full logical extraction, I would argue that it's probably about double usually what we see in terms of an iPhone. Obviously, if you use targeted methodology, intelligent, not going to take as long. But those are real rough things. Just to give you an idea, when a person says to you, how long am I without my phone? I have a job and I need to use it. You're usually talking about, if they want to come to our lab, it can be an hour or so. If they want to drop it off, go get Starbucks, come back, they can do that. If we can go to them, like Richard showed, if we have the kit, we can go to them and get it done while they're in a meeting or at lunch or whatever. But typically, it shouldn't ever take anyone more than a day to be without a phone. I mean, no one wants to do that.
Is it not a best practice to try to make a forensic image? Take a full, put it in the Slack space and system
Yeah.
files in order to, again, you can validate, rather than targeting where you may very well miss something.
Yeah.
You get it done faster.
So I would say it depends on the case. Depends on what you're dealing with. Obviously, if some cases are strictly about his and my communication about a certain real estate transaction, and there's no argument that we deleted anything, or it's about a language and a contract, and so you don't need to get and drill down to that level. I would say that 90+% of the cases we do a full logical extraction. I would even argue, we haven't got there yet, and we will in a minute, that when possible and time allow, because when we're going to talk about the physical, we're talking about upwards of like, in our testing, and this is literally, what, 3 weeks old or so?
About a month, yeah.
A month, yeah. So it's, I mean, we've done testing on it now. It's taking between like 8, 10, 12 hours to get the same phone that takes 30, 40, 60 minutes to get with the physical. So, you know, there's a cost trade-off there, you know, between people like, well, I'm not giving my phone up. What we tell them usually is like, you know, a lot of times with computers, we say, give it to us at the end of the day. Well, with phones, I'm telling them, give it to us when you go to bed. I mean, let it run overnight and then get it back first thing in the morning. You had a question?
So technically, because I get this question fairly often, and I'm kind of stuck for an answer, and no one wants to give up their phone. So technically, I can have a courier go out and get their phone, drive it over to you guys handle it for a half a day, perhaps, because you're just extracting the data.
Sure.
It's not searching, not cherry picking
Yep.
anything. Extracting it and then query it back to them.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, most custodians, what they do is they want to, I mean, we're at the corner of Walk and Walk. We're at 635 and 75. So, I mean, most people just want to come to our office and go to the Starbucks a block away and then come back in an hour or go to McDonald's or whatever. And, you know, they don't want to be without it. It's like a, you know, security blanket. So that's what we usually say is like, listen, just come by during working hours and we'll get it done for you. I mean, we have multiple dongles and devices that we use, so it's not like, you know, they can't get to it or there's a line or anything to get to the next sandwich or ice cream, you know.
All great questions, and we get these questions every time I'm
Yep.
in the field.
Yep.
So once this extraction summary comes up, we know that we've collected the. God, I don't have any contacts in this one. I'm not a sales guy.
Good, yeah. That's all right, we have questions, you're good.
So right here, we've extracted the information using UFED for PC. Now we take this and we dump it into Physical Analyzer, which is then going to extrapolate the data and put it in a nice user interface, just like the iPhone. And so this device took around 47 minutes, and it had 9 gigs of data. So if you can kind of do the math there, as the data goes up, your time is going to increase as well.
Yeah, it's not perfectly linear, but it's pretty good. So, I mean, Richard has it's funny, Richard and Annie, we did a couple of their phones. Neither one has much data on it, but like I keep making the joke, I mean, depending on the user and what their level is, I mean, you can see 4 and 6 hour collections on Android devices today, on a number of them that we do.
That's absolutely right. So right here we've got logical, file system, and physical, just as a high-level overview of about the major types of extractions that we can do on both an iOS device and an Android. Our two most common are going to be logical and physical. And as you move from left to right, remember, time increases, but so does data and the categories of data that you're going to be able to pull back. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Steve, and he's actually going to talk about one of my favorite shows.
Am I?
Yeah.
There's Billions. It's a good show. I like this. Chuck Rhodes and Bobby Axelrod. Yeah. So, you know, we were talking earlier about cases that we deal with and how much mobile device and user behavior is now really resident on your tablets and your phones and not so much your computer anymore. They had John Malkovich, one of my favorite actors, was in this for like a year and a half, season and a half of the episode. He actually disabled the trading company, their traders, and he disabled their ability to use their entire network computer system. So they were relying on doing everything on mobile devices. And nowadays, regardless of whether data is deleted or not, you're still able to access and get to, because remember, it's really disabling a pointer inside a database versus actually deleting data like you would classically. And nowadays with solid state drives, what's really happening is every time you're rebooting them, it's covering up space. So you can't even get to data like you used to be able to get to data. We used to do, you know, carving for data, and you'd get it, and you do proximity searches around certain key terms and things to try to access data. The reality is today, trying to access deleted data as it relates to computer technology is pretty moot. I mean, there's not really a high chance to do so. Phone data, much better in terms of items that people believe are deleted. So how good's iPhone? What do you think? How good's Apple in terms of security? Really good. I mean, I give them a B plus A minus. I mean, they're outstanding. And I laugh, and I know it's a sad situation, but in these cases like the terrorist stuff where they're trying to get the stuff, Apple's not unwilling to help. They can't help. I mean, there is no back door. I mean, yes, there are things that we now talk about in terms of jailbreaking where people figure things out later about earlier versions of either software and or devices. And once again, we're going to get to that. But they're very good. I always say a phone ain't a phone, right? I mean, now with communication-centric analyses, I think phones and text messages are something you absolutely want to get, the SMS, the MMS, and the chats in every case you can. Nowadays, okay, exfiltration migration, probably the soup of the day case that we work on are people that take things. 70% of people that leave a company believe they have the right to take data with them, okay? Whether you think that's good, bad, indifferent, obviously it you know, begs the issue of, are you taking stuff across the street to a new employer? And so how can you steal data? Tell me the ways you can migrate data. And not just mobile devices, but just in general. USB is the most famous one, right? Everyone says USB, we always do the connectivity analysis. What else? Email to email, so I can send it to my wife's email, or I can send it to my friend's email. What else? Dropbox.
Cloud.
Excellent, so we have the take pictures, that's a very popular one. And not only do you take pictures, my wife works for auction.com, and they actually use their phones to scan in all the data on site. So they literally are scanning in data, which they can then exfiltrate or send out. She's not a crook, so she's not doing it inappropriately. But I mean, you can use it, and then I also heard the repository over here, so you can link to Box.com or, you know, Dropbox or any of those as well. So we've covered most of the ways you can take information out of an environment. If I was in, like, Kevin's office here at this place, and he walked away, I was in his office, I'd get access to stuff, and even if you took the device away from me before I walked out the door, it's possible I could have exfiltrated. The one thing I added at the bottom was snooping apps. And these are pretty cool. So we could do an entire presentation on apps, because they're fascinating. Snooping apps, so two professors at SMU, right up the street, developed a app that is iOS and Android based, where you can put it here next to a computer and it can differentiate and tell every keystroke, the uniqueness of each keystroke, such that it can go ahead and record as I type information. If I'm writing something, kind of like a keylogger would in the background of your computer, it can actually get through vibration, which I found hard to believe when I first heard about it, because why is the 7 that different from the 8, right? And how's the L different from if you shift? And it works at like a 99% level. Amazing what's out there. Remember this? 87? Was it 3? No, 87 or so. So this is when the market plummeted. And in a minute, a New York Minute, which is actually a phrase coined by somebody out of Texas Monthly to talk about New York, in a New York Minute, what happens on the internet. So this is pretty cool. Have you all seen this probably on LinkedIn before? And we have 2 slides, one for the 19, one for the 18. Sorry to do that to you. But the only thing I really want to show here is in 1 minute's time, just look at a couple of them. So like email sent. We talk about data growth and trying to get access to stuff. We're going from 156 million emails in a minute to 187 million in a 1-year period of time, and it grows after that. The other one I love is Netflix. If you look at that, starts at 70,000 hours up to 260, and then look now in 19, and you can imagine 2020 in terms of usage. But it's amazing how much data is traveling back and forth over mobile devices and the utilization of apps, and not just on normalized platforms inside corporate offices. Look that stuff up, or I'll make this available for you. 15 top messaging platforms in the US. You're looking at it. What is the fastest growing message platform in the world? Listen closely to my question. Nope. WeChat. You're good. There's a couple you gotten today. So, but look at it. In the US, it's nothing. Right? Why is WeChat so great? We're so big. And who created WeChat? The Chinese government created it. So I had friends, I did a presentation the other day like this, And afterwards, a lawyer walked up to me and said, my kid was there, 20-something-year-old with like 5 of her friends, and they were in China. And by the way, when you're in China and you want to like find out where a good place to eat is or whatever, like you don't go to Yelp, you go to WeChat. And if you want to get food delivered to you, you don't have like Favor or Grubhub, you use WeChat. And if you want to do banking, you don't use Venmo or Zelle or anything, use WeChat. If you want to get Uber or Lyft, nope, use WeChat. And so it basically is this overarching app that when you're there, you pretty much have to utilize for banking, communication, and everything else. The moment they got to the Beijing airport, all 6 of them concomitantly, same time, had their accounts disabled as they walked into the airport. No big brother there, is there? Had to do the gratuitous, suits slide for lawyers, right? So the thing about this show, if you watched it, and I was just watching the last season of it the other day with my wife, is about data destruction, right? A lot of it is about things that have been destroyed and hidden, and so let's talk about destruction of data and getting to it. So we talked about deleting text. Is a deleted text deleted? And the answer is it can be, and it may not be. A lot of it is that LIFO-FIFO thing of getting pushed out and you're not certain whether you can get back to it or not. But we saw in the examples with Richard that they absolutely had deleted content that we're able to get to. Reset to factory settings. When you do that, can you get any information off the device? So yes or no? No, absolutely not. But remember, below you can get to other locations, redundancy. So even though they reset to factory settings, you still can get access to backups. Everyone remember everyone know who Tom Brady is, right? Deflategate, quarterback for the New England Patriots. Got called in, had to produce his device. Came in with a blank device. I had reset my phone to factory settings. Okay, nobody over the age of 21 in America would reset their phone to factory settings and then have to repopulate their contacts and their applications and the information resident on their phone. It's just think about it. I have 1,000 contacts on my phone. I'm going to delete it and then start from scratch populating it? Not so much. So, okay, what were the 3 rules of the Gremlins? I got to rush them. Huh?
Don't get them
Okay,
wet.
do not get them wet.
Feed them after midnight.
Do not feed them after midnight. This is uncanny. What's the third one? Huh? Bright light. Remember bright light? Bright light. So I've done this presentation 30 to 50 times, and every single one, I told them this yesterday, every single one, the third one answer to this is always the light. That's uncanny.
Wow.
No one has ever said it first, or I just differentially hear what I want. All right, so what are the 3 rules for mobile device collections? We talked about this. If you can use physical extraction to answer your question, sir, is if you can use it, because it will be more robust, and I love your defensibility argument. Why not do it if the case in any way could hinge upon important information to get to? So I'm with you. Search computers and backups. I've beaten that to death, but it's for good reason. Okay, there's other places that data may exist. And then this one we didn't talk a lot about, but a lot of companies now in this field are utilizing multiple parsers. There's not a great way to deduplicate the data on the back end for review, and we could do another whole session on production and review of textual-based data, because it's kind of ugly. It's not very sexy when you get it out, because it's text-based, right? It's coming out of a structured database, and it's just dumping out, and it's linear, it's flat. So it doesn't look like the cool little bubbles on the phone when you're talking to your kids or your wife or husband or whatever. So we use more than one parser on cases to see if we get different answers in terms of the data it pulls back. And yes, it does. And no, I can't explain why one does one way. I mean, it's all different. It's all the interactions between things. Molly's Game. Anybody see this? It's a good movie. So this is real simple. We talked about this earlier, all or nothing, right? When you're dealing with iPhones, you're getting all. When you're dealing with the Android technology, you can specify all or nothing. So you have to make your choices, okay? Real quick, because we're down to like 5 minutes. Talk quickly, if you would, Richard, for a couple minutes, because we got to let him go. Just about what the latest and greatest is in Celebrite. You don't need to go through all the subsidiary
That's fine.
things, but look at that main one after this.
Yeah. So this new feature that Celebrite's offering, we're doing some research and development on it. Essentially, what that means to you is there's this product called Checkmate. And what Checkmate is it exploits a design flaw in some Apple chipsets, A5 through 11, I believe, which that
Through 10.
A5 through 11 chipset.
Oh, got it. Yeah, okay.
So it's the specific chipset. The iPhone 11 has the A13,
Yeah.
so that's irrelevant. But 85% of all iOS devices in circulation have an A5 through an A11 chip, which means because of this flaw in the design of the chip, we are actually able to, using this Checkmate software, create a full file extraction from an iPhone, which has never been possible before. The high-level overview, what does that mean? Great, Richard, what's an A5 chip? Okay, we're able to now collect email that's resident on the physical device, which previously, because of cloud security settings, we were not able to do.
And that's only for iPhone 5S through iPhone 10, and it must be the firmware or the software of 12 forward. right?
12.3 forward.
12.3 forward, okay?
Yeah.
So that's gonna cover a lot of situations, not every situation. So if you call with an iPhone 11, or you have an older version like 4, or they haven't updated their firmware or software, then it won't apply. And then just look at the differential between the, yeah, this is the most important.
And so here's the main comparison. Here's the delta. So we mentioned earlier the amount of time that it's going to cost. We've done my phone that had 11 gigs on it, and that took about 4 hours. We did someone's phone that had about 100 gigs of data on it, and that took 12 hours. So, I mean, if you're able to do it, that's great, but do be aware that we've got to plan that ahead of time. And again, the main takeaway is we can get email data, and we have a greater chance of extracting out data that has been deleted from the phone, but not pushed out of the device.
So I think we're probably up against time. Is there another presentation right at 11 in this room?
Yeah, 11:10.
Oh, okay, cool. So we have a couple minutes. Okay, good. I have
There's
2 more
a break
minutes.
in there.
Now listen, you can't get me off the stage, so okay, keep going.
So the subsequent slides, this is just a live test that was run. It was on an iPhone 8. Now remember, this is the same exact phone, same exact data. We did them back to back. The first method we ran through Physical Analyzer Method 1, which was the demo that I did. That resulted in just under 5 gigs of data. Same exact phone. Right after we did that, we performed using the Checkmate software add-on, and we were able to glean just under 20 gigs of data. So the subsequent slides are going to highlight some of the areas where it's most pertinent. And I want to hover here for a moment because this is the key differentiator. On the left, we've got our logical extraction with 237 live reclaimed emails. On the right, the physical produced just under 2,000. So, you know, in terms of looking at data and analyzing what we can and can't get, I mean, that's incredible.
And a lot of the mail we used to get off of iPhone, this is specific to iPhone, is stubs. So they're not even the totality of the email. It doesn't have the content a lot of times. It just has the header and, you know, address information, to, from, date, timestamp, maybe the subject, but not the content. This is actually getting with content, the email. So it's an additional source. Same thing with, you know, everyone comes to me and says, hey, I want to get this guy's email off my computer. And I'm like, well, chances are it doesn't live there. Chances are it's probably in the cloud nowadays, it's not hosted anywhere. And there may be syncing to your computer and some that lives there, that, you know, due to configuration, but it's probably not where you're looking for the full picture of it. Well, this is an additional area now, someone who is actively deleted, and if they were using their corporate email and deleting things, it may still live here.
That's absolutely right. And this slide is going to show us that, you know, with the logical, we weren't really able to get a whole lot of that third-party app data. With the physical, you can see Google Drive files, Google Docs, and your keychain, which translates to passwords. So again, a lot more content, a lot more categories of content.
So, you know, long story short, we could talk hours about this, and the last kind of slide that Richard did had to do with the latest and greatest. A lot of the platforms, a lot that you guys work with now, have the ability to accept in like the UFDR directly into the platform instead of just taking out CSVs, Excels, text-based information and dump it in, which is very unattractive for practitioners to review and then actually produce the other side and make decisions on things. So we're now seeing people taking the entirety of it and placing it in there. You still have parsing problems with it. I had somebody tell me yesterday in a meeting that their platform crashed because they took in a UFED report and it had like, I had one of the conversations with my kids, it might be 30,000 lines long, right? And it hit upon a key thing, and so when it talked about the whole conversation, it captured everything. And exploded their platform trying to do it. So, a lot of interesting stuff. I know you guys got to get moving forward, so we'll be sensitive to your time because it's right at 11. We appreciate you all coming today.
Thank you very much.